Officer found a pregnant German shepherd being beaten in Snowstorm. What he did next brought tears. Snow came down in sheets so thick it blurred the pine line into a grey wall. Officer Drew Harland slowed his patrol truck as the wipers clawed at the windshield. He had driven this back road outside Whitetail Creek 100 times, but tonight every drift felt like it was hiding something. The air smelled of diesel and wood smoke, and under it all was that gut-deep sense he used to get on patrols overseas, the quiet before contact. He cracked the window. The hiss of the storm spilled inside, cold as glass. For a moment there was only wind and the ticking of the engine. Then he heard it, a sound so faint it might have been the storm itself, a high, strangled cry that rose and broke off. He eased off the gas, leaning forward. The headlights cut a corridor through the blizzard. In that tunnel of light, a nightmare took shape. A man in a torn brown coat was standing at the edge of an old lumber fence, one arm raised. At his feet, chained to a post, a German shepherd heavy with pregnancy tried to brace herself against the blows. She didn't bark. She didn't even flinch anymore. Her fur was matted with ice and mud, snow turning pink beneath her paws. "Police! Drop it!" Drew's voice cracked across the storm. Training slid into place before his mind could catch up. He threw the truck into park, opened the door, boots crunching into knee-deep drifts. The man spun, his face shadowed under a hood. For a split second, Drew saw a pale scar down one cheek and a coiled snake tattoo crawling up his neck. The guy's gloved hands tightened on the sawed-off stock he'd been using as a club. His eyes flicked past Drew toward the trees, calculating. "Hands where I can see them." Drew took 2 steps forward, gun drawn, shoulders squared against the wind. The man muttered a curse and bolted into the pines, snow spraying from his boots. Drew lunged, but the blizzard swallowed the figure whole. All that remained was the groan of an idling pickup truck at the roadside, exhaust puffing white ghosts into the air. Drew lowered his weapon, his breath a harsh fog. He turned to the shepherd. The chain around her neck was thick, padlocked to the fence post. She tried to back away, but her legs buckled. A low tremor ran through her body. "Easy, girl," he said, his voice softening, the same tone he'd used with nervous canines years ago. "Nobody's going to hurt you now." She lifted her head. Amber eyes met his, alert, intelligent, but dulled with exhaustion. Snow clung to her whiskers. Her belly trembled under the weight of unborn pups. Drew holstered his gun and dropped to one knee. He pulled a multi-tool from his pocket, fingers stiff with cold, and worked at the chain. Metal bit into his gloves. The storm hissed around them like static. After a few seconds, the link snapped, and the shepherd sagged forward, leaning into his thigh as though gravity had shifted. "You're safe," he murmured. "I've got you." He slipped his arms under her body. She was heavier than she looked, heat bleeding through his coat. Her heart hammered against his forearm. Snowflakes stung his face as he rose, carrying her toward the patrol truck. The lights from the dash flashed over churned-up snow. Something glinted by the fence post. Drew crouched and picked up a phone, screen still glowing despite the cold. A burner. A text blinked across it. "Shipment failed. Get the dog back before it gives birth." Attached was a code list under the heading K9 Inventory. He stared at the words, jaw tightening. Shiloh, that's what he would call her, wasn't just an abused stray. She was evidence, and someone would come looking. He set the phone in an evidence bag, then eased Shiloh into the back seat of his truck. She curled up, belly heaving, eyes following every movement. He covered her with his spare duty jacket. "Hang on," he said quietly, closing the door. The storm was closing in, erasing tracks, but the smell of diesel and blood still hung in the air, a sign of the man who had fled. As Drew climbed behind the wheel and pulled back onto the road, Shiloh let out a low, throaty sound. Not a whimper, but something between a warning and a question. Drew glanced in the rearview mirror. Her ears were pricked toward the darkness, nostrils flaring as if she could still taste the man's scent in the storm. He tightened his grip on the wheel. This was no routine cruelty call. It was a message, and he had just intercepted it. The veterinary clinic stood at the edge of Whitetail Creek, its brick walls buried behind a snowdrift that nearly swallowed the front steps. A green wooden sign above the door creaked in the wind. Timberline Animal Care. Warm yellow light spilled from the windows like a promise. Drew parked the patrol truck as close as he could, killed the engine, and stepped into the wind. Shiloh whimpered softly in the back seat, but didn't resist when he opened the door. She was shivering under the jacket he'd wrapped around her, her ears barely twitching in response to the storm. "You're okay," he whispered, sliding his arms beneath her again. "We're almost there." She didn't flinch as he lifted her. It struck him. That kind of stillness didn't come from trust. It came from exhaustion, maybe trauma, the weight of a dog who'd stopped expecting kindness. Inside the clinic, a chime rang as he pushed through the door. The air hit him like a wall, heat, antiseptic, and cedar bedding. A woman appeared from the back room, wiping her hands on a towel. "Deputy Harlan?" she asked, eyes catching on the badge at his chest. "Yeah," he nodded. "Casey, right?" "Dr. Casey Lynn," she corrected gently. "What happened?" He laid Shiloh on the examination table with more care than he'd used for some humans. The dog whimpered, tail curled tight under her body, but didn't growl, didn't even raise her head. Casey pulled on gloves and moved toward the table with a calm, practiced step. "She was being beaten," Drew said, jaw clenched. "Chained in the storm. She's pregnant. Found her up off Route 6 near the old mill yard." Casey didn't answer right away. Her hands moved across Shiloh's flank, pressing gently, checking her belly. Her touch was light, but thorough. She murmured something soft. Just sound. No words. The dog's breathing eased slightly. "She's near term," Casey said quietly. "Badly dehydrated. Bruised, but no fractures I can feel yet. I need to scan her. That okay?" Drew nodded. Casey retrieved a microchip scanner from a drawer and ran it slowly along Shiloh's neck. The device beeped. A number flashed on the display. Casey frowned. "What is it?" "That's a federal canine registry ID," she said. "This isn't a pet. She's law enforcement, or she was." Drew felt his breath hitch. "Which agency?" "Code prefix says Department of Justice. But this tag's outdated. Looks like she was part of a now-defunct task force. Program was dismantled maybe a year ago. A few of the dogs went missing." Drew stepped back, his hands curled into fists. He'd heard rumors. Canines disappearing after programs shut down. Some rehomed, some sold off quietly. But no one ever said where they really ended up. "She wasn't rehomed," he said. "No," Casey agreed. "And it gets worse." She pointed to a small surgical line inside Shiloh's right ear. It was faint, but clean, professional. "She was implanted," Casey said. "Not just a tracker. Could be biometric. Could have been for drug detection. Could have been for something else." "Something else like what?" Casey moved to draw blood. As she slid the needle into the vein, Shiloh tensed but didn't growl. Her amber eyes locked with Drew's. They didn't look away. "Good girl," he murmured. "We're just figuring things out." As the vial filled, Casey turned it slowly in the overhead light. A faint shimmer of something, not blood, clung to the glass. She dipped a strip into the vial, let it soak, then waited. A moment later, the strip turned faintly blue. "That's narcotic residue," she said. "Low grade, but present. She's been in direct contact. Maybe not ingested, but carried. On her fur, in her wounds, maybe even sewn into a harness." Drew swore under his breath. She was trafficked, he said. Casey nodded. She's evidence, she said. And if someone left her behind, it wasn't a mistake. They meant to get rid of her. The idea settled between them like the snow outside. Drew looked at Shiloh. She was watching Casey now, ears flicking, alert, wary, but no longer afraid. As if she understood that something had shifted. She didn't bark once. Drew said, "Not when he hit her. Not when I carried her. She didn't make a sound." "She's trained," Casey said. "To withstand, to obey. Even past the point she should." That landed like a punch. Drew pulled the burner phone from his coat pocket and handed it over. Casey scanned the screen. She blinked at the message. "Shipment failed." She read aloud. "Get the dog back before it gives birth." "She's not cargo," Drew said. "No," Casey agreed. "But someone treated her like she was." Drew exhaled slowly. The heater kicked on in the ceiling, casting a warm hum across the clinic. "I want to keep her close," he said. "Clinic's secure." Casey hesitated. "It's safe enough for now, but if they know she's alive, they'll come back." "I'll stay with her," Drew said. "She's not going through this alone." Casey gave him a look. Not questioning, just weighing. "She's going to need antibiotics," she said. "IV fluids, and quiet. No noise, no sudden movement. The trauma's fresh." "I can do quiet," he said. As Casey hooked the drip line into Shiloh's leg, the dog gave a soft whine. Not pain, not fear, just recognition. Drew crouched beside the table, resting a hand lightly on her head. "You're not cargo," he whispered. "You're mine now." For the first time since the storm, Shiloh blinked slowly and let her eyes close. The bond had formed, and no words were needed. The storm had passed, but the wind still prowled outside like something with teeth. Inside Timberline Animal Care, the world had quieted to a low hum, the drip of an IV bag, the faint creak of wood settling, the soft shuffle of movement behind closed doors. Shiloh hadn't barked once since they'd brought her in. She didn't need to. Her silence was sharper than sound. She lay curled in the corner of the back exam room, bandaged leg stretched out, belly distended under a fleece blanket. The IV line ran from her foreleg to a metal stand beside the table. Her breathing was slow but steady, but her eyes never stopped moving. Drew had been watching her for over an hour. He wasn't on the clock. No one had asked him to stay. But something about the way she kept her gaze fixed, on one corner of the room, just past the sink, had tied a knot in his gut he couldn't shake loose. She would growl, low and guttural, only when she turned her head in that direction. Never loud, never aggressive, just a warning, a line drawn in invisible chalk. Casey glanced over from her small desk in the adjoining office. "She's alert," she said, voice quiet. "Too alert," Drew muttered. "She's picking up something," Casey agreed. "But I don't know what." Drew crossed the room, crouching beside the dog. She didn't flinch when he touched her head. Her ears were up, posture tense. Not from pain, from instinct. "Shiloh," he said gently. "What are you telling me?" Her eyes flicked back to that corner. She didn't move, but her throat rumbled again. Drew stood, walked over, and knelt by the baseboard. It was clean, nothing obvious, but when he leaned closer, he caught it, a scent, faint, acrid, not blood, not dog, chemical. He pulled a pair of latex gloves from a nearby drawer, lifted the base of the wall panel, and ran his fingers along the inner edge. His glove came back with a smudge of grey dust. "Casey," he said, "what do you clean with in here? Hospital-grade disinfectant. Why? This isn't that." He rubbed the dust between his fingers. It left a strange, tacky film, almost oily. Casey stepped over and leaned in. "That's not from me," she said. "We deep cleaned 2 nights ago." Drew pulled a sterile bag from the supply shelf and sealed the residue inside. "She's reacting to this," he said. "She smells it, recognizes it. Could be residual from the narcotics." "You think they used her to transport?" Casey asked, frowning. He nodded. "Not inside her body, but maybe on her coat. Maybe they rubbed it into her fur or stitched it into her harness." "I checked her gear. It's gone," Casey said. "Whoever left her stripped everything but the chain." Drew turned back toward Shiloh. Her eyes were still on him, watching, waiting. "I think she's trained to detect it," he said. "But I also think she hates it. Because it hurt her," Casey said quietly. Outside, a gust of wind slammed against the wall, hard enough to rattle the window panes. Drew moved to the hallway. The front of the clinic was empty. Night had come early, as it always did in January. Streetlights bled yellow across snowbanks. Everything looked quiet. "Lock the back door," he said. Casey nodded and double-checked the bolt. The silence inside the clinic grew tighter, more brittle. Shiloh hadn't stopped watching. Later, after Casey turned in for a few hours of sleep in the staff break room, Drew sat in the reception area, watching the security feed from the front desk monitor. He had rewound the footage from the past 24 hours, frame by frame. Most of it was nothing. Snow blowing across the porch, a delivery van dropping off meds, a teenager knocking on the wrong door. But then, at 3:17 a.m., a figure appeared. Drew paused the footage. The camera caught the edge of the alley behind the clinic, grainy in the night vision lens. A man. Hood pulled low, hands in his coat pockets, standing absolutely still at the corner of the building, watching. He didn't move toward the doors, didn't try to enter, just stood there for 45 seconds, then turned and disappeared into the dark. Drew leaned closer. Even with the poor resolution, he could make out a shape on the man's neck, a blur that looked like ink, a curl, a coil, a tattoo. He didn't say the name out loud. He hit record, copied the clip to a flash drive, then moved back toward the exam room. Shiloh hadn't shifted, but her eyes snapped to him the second he entered. "He was here," Drew said softly. "Whoever hurt you, he came back." She made no sound, but her head dipped slightly, as if she understood. Drew knelt by her again, one hand resting near her paw, not touching. "You're not just watching," he said. "You remember. You don't forget anything, do you?" Outside, the wind howled again, scraping snow across the glass. Shiloh closed her eyes, just for a moment. But she didn't sleep. She was waiting. By late afternoon, the storm had turned to a steady, icy drizzle that painted the streets of Whitetail Creek in silver streaks. Drew drove slowly back to the station with Shiloh in the back seat, the heater blasting. She sat upright now, less like a victim and more like a sentinel. Her eyes followed every turn in the road. At the clinic, Casey had argued. "She can't stay in town," she said, zipping her fleece vest. "I have a friend at the Cascade Rescue Center. They have secure kennels off the grid. No one would find her there." "She trusts me," Drew replied. He was standing with one hand on Shiloh's lead, the other on the burner phone in an evidence bag. "If I move her now, she'll think I'm abandoning her. She's been passed around enough." Casey's pale green eyes had softened, but her voice stayed firm. "Trust doesn't keep bullets out. Drew, whoever had her, they're organized. She's pregnant and she's evidence. That makes her a target." He had hesitated. The rational part of him knew Casey was right. But something deeper, something older, held him back. He had been the last face a lot of dogs saw overseas. He wasn't going to let that happen again. "Just for tonight," he said finally. Tomorrow we'll talk about moving her. Now, back at the station, he carried Shiloh through the narrow hallway to the small animal holding area tucked behind the lockup. The place smelled of gun oil and floor cleaner. A single large kennel waited, lined with a fleece mat. Shiloh hesitated at the threshold. Her nostrils flared. She gave a low whine, then stepped inside on her own. Drew crouched to her level. "It's just for now, girl." He murmured, "You're safe." Her eyes met his. Amber, intelligent, unreadable. She turned once before curling onto the mat, muscles taut beneath her fur. Drew locked the kennel, but left the key hanging from a hook just beside the gate. He walked back to his desk. The station was quiet. Officer Ruiz was on patrol. Casey had gone home to grab supplies. It was just him and the dog. He scrolled through the inventory files again. Every ID matched a missing canine from some agency. Some from the Border Patrol, some from state police. All vanished off the books after programs dissolved. Shiloh wasn't an outlier. She was part of a pattern. A soft sound drew his head up. Shiloh was on her feet, ears pricked, staring at the door. Her tail was stiff. A low growl rolled from her chest. Drew rose. "What is it?" She didn't move her eyes from the hallway. A knock sounded at the front desk. Not the tentative tap of a visitor. Sharp. 3 times. Drew slid his hand to his holster and walked toward the lobby. A man in a brown, insulated jacket stood at the counter, clipboard tucked under one arm. Snow clung to his boots. He wore a cap low over his brow and gloves with the fingertips cut off. "Afternoon, officer," the man drawled. "Got a delivery for your evidence locker?" Drew scanned him. "I didn't order anything." "Maybe your sergeant did. Paperwork's here." He slid the clipboard across the counter. Drew glanced down. The form was blank except for a signature line. His stomach tightened. "What's in the truck?" "Supplies, animal control equipment. Guess you've got a dog in there." The man's eyes flicked past Drew, down the hall. Behind him, from the holding area, Shiloh exploded into a deep, rolling bark. Not panic, recognition. The sound vibrated through the walls. Drew's pulse spiked. He looked back at the man. Snake tattoo. A coil peeking above the jacket collar. For a heartbeat, the storm outside vanished, and he was back at the fence, watching the rifle stock swing. "That your dog?" the man asked, smiling without warmth. "She's evidence," Drew said evenly. "Stay where you are." The man shifted his weight. "Easy, just doing my job." Drew reached for the radio on his shoulder but hesitated. Procedure said confirm identity before detaining. Procedure said don't escalate without cause. The man's truck idled outside, exhaust puffing into the cold. Shiloh barked again, claws scraping metal. Her body slammed once against the kennel door. Drew's thumb hovered over the transmit button. He heard Casey's voice in his head. "Trust doesn't keep bullets out." "Name," Drew said. "Rick Vaughn," the man said smoothly. "Got ID in the truck if you want to see it." Drew took a step closer. "Stay right here. I'll check the paperwork." He turned slightly toward his office, meaning to grab his phone for a plate check. It was just a second. But when he looked back, the man's eyes had flicked down the hall again. Another bark, louder. Shiloh's teeth flashed behind the bars. She lunged once more, not at the man but at the scent. Drew forced himself to keep his voice calm. "I'll need to see inside the truck." The man smiled, a quick flash of teeth. "Sure thing, officer." He turned for the door. Drew followed, pulse hammering. But before he could step outside, a text buzzed on his phone. Casey on her way back. "Need to check the blood work results with you. ETA 5 minutes." He looked up. The man was already at the truck, climbing into the cab. He glanced over his shoulder, eyes locking with Drew's for a heartbeat. Then he gunned the engine. Snow sprayed as the truck pulled away from the curb and vanished into the street. Drew stood in the doorway, fists clenched. He'd followed procedure. He'd done what the badge demanded. And in doing so, he'd let the man who had beaten Shiloh walk into his station, look her in the eye, and walk out again. When he turned back, Shiloh was standing in the kennel, panting hard, eyes fixed on the door as though it might open again. The low growl in her throat hadn't stopped. "I'm sorry," Drew murmured. He crouched by the bars, sliding a hand under the gate. Shiloh sniffed his fingers but didn't relax. Her muscles were coiled like wire. She'd warned him. He hadn't listened. Outside, the sound of the truck's engine faded. Inside, the station felt suddenly smaller, the walls closer. Drew looked at the evidence bag on his desk, the burner phone, the code lists, and knew the line between safety and danger had just thinned. For the first time since he'd brought her in, Shiloh turned her head fully toward him. Her eyes weren't just watching now. They were pleading. It happened just before midnight. A low, muffled boom split the silence of the snow-covered town. The lights at the police outpost flickered. Drew bolted upright from the cot in the back room, his pulse kicking into high gear. He was at the station that night because he couldn't bring himself to leave Shiloh alone. She had been moved into one of the heated back kennels after showing signs of labor. The vet had warned it could be early complications, but Drew suspected it was more than that. Shiloh hadn't just been pacing and whimpering. She'd been alert, nose in the air, as if the threat wasn't inside her, but outside. Smoke curled from the evidence room on the south end of the building. Officers scrambled. Drew shoved open the metal door and was hit by the acrid bite of melted plastic and scorched documents. Most of the hard drives were fried. Surveillance footage from the past week, gone. As firefighters swept in, Casey arrived, her cheeks flushed and hair still damp from sleep. She found Drew kneeling in the snow behind the station, holding a damp, crumpled folder he'd pulled from the half-frozen gutter. It had been tossed. Someone wanted it gone but didn't burn it completely. Inside were smudged aerial maps. Red lines curved through rural backroads, linking points in Utah, Arizona, and into the southern edge of Colorado. Casey traced the ink with a gloved finger. "These are drop points," she whispered. "And look at these initials next to them. K9 unit call signs. They're numbered." Drew looked down at the numbers. 57. At least 57 dogs. Trained K9s, each logged like cargo. No names, just barcodes. His throat tightened. Shiloh whined from her kennel as they returned inside, her breathing labored now. Casey slid in next to her and ran her hands gently over the dog's belly. "She's not in labor," Casey said, eyes narrowing. "She's reacting to pain." Beneath Shiloh's ribcage, Casey found the slightest hint of bruising. Drew remembered the way the so-called delivery guy had touched the bars, the way Shiloh had growled. They weren't just watching the dog. They were making. Sure, she didn't talk in the only language she knew. His phone rang. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. "This is Agent Eliza Monroe, FBI. I understand you found evidence linked to a K9 smuggling ring." Drew stepped into the hallway. "Yes. There was an attempted arson tonight at the evidence locker. We have partial maps, movement patterns, and a dog who used to be theirs." Silence hummed on the other end. Then Eliza's voice returned, low and urgent. "That dog may have been stationed at one of our shadow ops sites. We lost an undercover agent 3 months ago. His last known location aligns with one of your red marks. We believe he was taken, possibly held in the same facility where these dogs were trained." Drew's knuckles tightened around the phone. What was the agent's name? Special Agent Tyler Kerrigan. He had been embedded in a trafficking network that used military-grade working dogs as mules. They embedded microcompartments in collars, vests, even subcutaneous tags. We think Shiloh might have been one of them. Drew's jaw clenched. He turned toward the kennel where Shiloh lay, her golden eyes flicking toward him. Not just in pain, waiting. "Eliza," he said, voice low. "Shiloh's trying to tell us something. She's been trying since the night I found her, and someone doesn't want us to hear it." "Then we need to listen. I'll be in town by morning." Click. Outside, the snow kept falling, silent and unrelenting. Inside, a dog who had seen too much curled in the corner of her cell, her breath shallow but steady. And in the air, just beneath the smoke, Drew could almost smell it now. Not just fear. Reckoning. The snowstorm had turned violent by midnight. Thick flurries pounded the windows of the sheriff's station like fists, drowning out most sounds from the outside world. Inside, Shiloh was in labor. Casey knelt beside her, sleeves rolled, a flashlight between her teeth. Her fingers moved with calm precision, but her mind raced. The first pup had already been born, a squirming, slick bundle of life, and another was coming fast. Shiloh was silent through it all, not whimpering, not yelping. Just deep breaths and hard eyes, as if pain wasn't new to her. Then came the shot. Not distant, not random. It cracked through the night air like a whip, echoing off the walls. Casey's head snapped up. Her pulse quickened. Another shot followed, then the unmistakable sound of shattering glass from the front of the station. Shiloh's ears shot up. Drew's voice came through the radio on the counter. "We've got armed intruders, 3 at least. They're here for something. Lock that room down, now." Casey moved, dragging a filing cabinet across the door. The pups came fast. Shiloh's instincts took over. She licked each one clean, nuzzling them close, but her eyes never left the door. In the hallway, Drew crouched low behind a flipped desk, his sidearm raised. One of the gunmen had already been dropped, gut shot, screaming. But the others weren't running. They were moving like they knew the layout, like they'd been here before. "They're going for the kennel," Officer Brandt yelled, his voice barely audible over another round of gunfire. "They're trying to retrieve the damn dog." Drew's blood ran cold. He took off down the back corridor, boots slamming on tile. Halfway there, he passed a figure slumped near the stairwell. Officer Reese. Blood pooled beneath her hip. Drew knelt fast. "I'm good," Reese hissed. "They hit my vest and clipped me on the way down. They're splitting up. 2 went east. One's near the generator." The lights flickered, then died. Total blackout. In the dark, something moved in the kennel. Shiloh stood, trembling but upright. Her eyes glinted faintly in the glow of emergency lights. She licked the last pup once, then turned toward the metal gate. Casey whispered, "Stay. You've done enough." But Shiloh didn't listen. A loud clack echoed through the air, metal snapping under pressure. Casey's eyes widened. "She broke the latch," she whispered. Shiloh didn't hesitate. She bolted past Casey, silent as smoke, paws slipping only once on the linoleum before disappearing down the corridor. Drew emerged at the other end, weapon drawn. He caught only a glimpse of movement. Then something tackled one of the masked intruders in the shadows. The man screamed as Shiloh sunk her teeth deep into his arm, dragging him down. Another figure stepped forward from the generator room, aiming straight for Drew's chest. Shiloh didn't bark. She launched. The second assailant turned just in time to take her full weight to the ribs. The gun skittered across the floor. Drew fired once, center mass. Silence returned. Then, a soft whimper. Drew spun. Brandt was crawling out from behind a cabinet, blood trailing from his leg. "Thought I was done." Brandt breathed. "Would have been too, if it weren't for her." Shiloh nudged his shoulder gently, then turned toward the pups. Back in the kennel room, Casey had wrapped them in towels and moved them beside a heating lamp powered by the backup generator. She looked up as Shiloh entered, limping slightly, blood on her muzzle but eyes sharp and alert. Shiloh curled herself around her litter again, without a sound. Not a whine. Not a sigh. as if her job wasn't done until all of them, her pups, the officers, the strangers she'd come to trust, were safe. Drew knelt beside her, brushing a hand across her head. "You're not just a survivor," he whispered. "You're a damn soldier." The storm raged outside. The station was scarred but standing, and in the heart of it all, a dog watched the door, not waiting for the danger, but daring it to return. It started with a knock that never should have come. Casey opened the back door of the station expecting Drew, maybe a deputy dropping off supply kits. Instead, it was a man she didn't recognize. Clean-shaven, quiet eyes, holding a clipboard and wearing a county utilities vest. "Need a quick signature, ma'am," he said calmly. "Transformer inspection." Casey barely had time to notice the patch on his vest, wrong county, before the man stepped inside. A needle jabbed her neck. The last thing she saw before blacking out was the silhouette of a second man scooping up one of Shiloh's pups from the heated crate. By the time Drew got the call, it was already 20 minutes too late. A burner phone buzzed at the sheriff's desk. The voice on the other end was calm, calculated. "We have the woman and the dog." A pause. "If you want either back, you'll come to the rail yard tonight. No cops. Bring the other pup. Alone." They hung up before Drew could say a word. He stood frozen for a moment, then slammed the receiver down. His knuckles were white. The room felt colder than it should have. Across the room, Shiloh rose slowly, ears twitching. She hadn't barked, hadn't whined, but she knew. Something was wrong. FBI agent Leanne Morano arrived less than an hour later. She scanned the scene, took in the remains of the struggle, the open crate. She knelt beside the remaining pups and looked at Drew. "We'll give them what they want," she said quietly, "but on our terms." They set the trap fast. The abandoned rail yard was a ghost town. Old freight containers, rusted tracks, broken lights that flickered like dying stars. Drew would go in with the second pup, a small tan male with a strong bark and Shiloh's eyes. A wire ran under his collar. An FBI sniper team would be stationed along the trestles. But they were playing a dangerous game with people who had nothing to lose. That night, Drew approached the center of the yard under the sharp beam of a halogen floodlight. One of the smugglers stepped out of a rail car, pistol visible. Casey pushed in front of him with her hands bound and a bruise blooming on her cheek. The pup was in a cage beside her, yelping. The man smiled. "You brought the other one. Good. Set it down." Drew hesitated, then lowered the carrier to the gravel. The pup inside let out a tiny growl, brave but unsure. Drew stepped back, slow and deliberate. Agent Morano's voice came through the earpiece, tight with tension. "We don't have a clear shot. Something's blocking the line of sight." The wind kicked up. For a moment, all was still. Then came the sound. Soft, deliberate. Paws on steel. From the far side of the rail yard, a shadow streaked out between two rusted cars. Shiloh. No leash, no command. Just fury and precision born from pain. She moved like a ghost of war, low and fast. The leader turned too late. Shiloh lunged, her jaws clamping onto his arm and dragging him down hard into the gravel. His pistol fired into the air. Another man raised his weapon, but a sniper bullet cracked before he could aim. Chaos erupted. Casey dropped to the ground. Drew dove toward her, shielding her as another shot rang out. The man under Shiloh struggled, screamed, tried to pull free, but she didn't let go. Her eyes burned with the memory of every cage, every stolen pup, every wound. 2 more smugglers tried to flee down the tracks. They didn't get far. FBI agents swarmed in from the flanks, weapons raised, voices loud and final. In less than 2 minutes, it was over. Shiloh stood atop the man she'd brought down, chest heaving, muzzle streaked with blood. She didn't look around. She didn't need to. She knew she'd done what no one else could. Casey crawled forward on shaking limbs and wrapped her arms around Shiloh. "You found me," she whispered, voice cracked. "You always find me." Drew knelt beside them. His hand rested gently on Shiloh's neck. For a long moment, no one said a word. The pup inside the crate whimpered. Shiloh turned, walked to the cage, nudged the latch open with her nose. The little one tumbled into the dirt, looking up at her with innocent eyes. Shiloh licked his face once, then nudged him toward Casey. She didn't bark, didn't whine. She simply sat, breath slow, eyes scanning the darkness again. Watching, waiting. As if loyalty didn't end when the fight was won. It just became quieter, more patient, more dangerous. The storm hit hard and fast, cloaking the world in a veil of white. By the time the team reached the ridgeline, visibility was down to less than 20 feet. Wind howled like something alive, clawing at coats, at skin, at reason. Snow came in sideways sheets, thick enough to swallow headlights and silence footfalls. But it didn't stop the chase. Frank Delaney was on the run. After the takedown at the rail yard, he'd vanished. Slipped through the FBI's fingers, leaving behind a pile of bodies and a blood-smeared rail car. But Shiloh had his scent now. She wouldn't lose it. They tracked him into the mountains, through a hunting trail Drew barely remembered from his childhood. Old logging routes, broken fences, the skeletal remains of a cabin twisted by time. Somewhere in that whiteout, Frank had holed up with what was left of his crew, and enough firepower to start a small war. They didn't wait for dawn. The FBI team flanked wide. Drew went up the center, rifle close, eyes sharper than the wind could blind. Casey stayed behind the secondary line, cradling the rescued pup inside her coat. Shiloh moved ahead, barely visible in the storm, more shadow than dog. Her coat blended with the snow, but her presence was unmistakable, focused, relentless. Then the world exploded. The first shot came from the right, missing Drew's shoulder by inches and slamming into a birch trunk. The second cracked just behind Agent Morano, forcing her squad to scatter. Flashbangs lit the storm like lightning. And then came the fire, automatic rifles opening up from a makeshift bunker dug into the side of a ridge. Shiloh didn't hesitate. She veered left, looping wide, using the slope for cover. Drew saw her vanish into the whiteness, heart seizing, but trusted her instinct. She knew the terrain better than they did now. Frank's voice rang out, sharp and hoarse. "You follow me. You die in the snow like the rest." Drew didn't answer. He surged forward, dodging behind a half-collapsed shed. Return fire whistled past his ears. From his angle he caught a glimpse of Frank reloading behind a barricade of sheet metal and logs. But something else caught his eye. A flare of movement to the right. Small, fast. Shiloh. She was circling behind Frank's position, her body low, mouth slightly open, blood trailing down one flank, a graze maybe. But she didn't slow. Even injured, she was pure purpose, pure fire. From the rear, a crack rang out. One of Frank's men had spotted her, raised his rifle. Drew didn't think. He fired. The man dropped. Smoke mixed with snow now. From the shattered propane tank someone hit with a lucky shot. Visibility dropped to near zero. But Drew could still hear it. The soft crunch of paws, the shift in Frank's stance, the sudden turn of his body as he realized he wasn't alone behind him. A low growl rose through the storm. Frank spun, rifle raised. Too late. Shiloh launched from the snowbank like a ghost forged from muscle and fury. Her jaws locked onto Frank's wrist, forcing the rifle down as it discharged harmlessly into the ground. He screamed, swinging wildly, trying to throw her off, but Shiloh held. Her hind legs dug into the snow, anchoring her like a stone. Drew moved fast, tackled Frank to the ground. The rifle skidded out of reach. Shiloh released only when Drew gave the command, sharp, direct, full of finality. Frank lay in the snow, face twisted in disbelief, mouth bleeding. You sent a dog after me?" Drew didn't answer. He simply cuffed him, tight and clean. Behind them, the storm began to settle. By the time the rest of the FBI moved in, the gunfire had stopped. The bunker was cleared, 5 arrested, 2 dead. No more gunmen left to fire. Casey ran through the thinning snow, the pup safe in her arms. She spotted Drew, then Shiloh, blood on her fur, chest heaving, but still standing, still alert. "Oh, God," Casey whispered, dropping to her knees. "You're hurt." Shiloh looked at her, eyes soft. She nudged the pup once, then rested her head against Casey's coat, as if to say, "He's safe. That's what matters." Later, in the helicopter back to base, Drew sat beside Shiloh, pressing gauze gently to her side. Her eyes closed, but her ears stayed perked. "You never stopped," he murmured. "Not once." A medic looked over, impressed. "That's some dog." Drew glanced down at her, and for the first time in weeks, smiled. "No," he said quietly. "That's a soldier." Outside the window, snow gave way to forest, and somewhere below, the smuggling ring that once ran unchecked across 3 counties was shattered. Because one dog refused to let the trail go cold, they named it the Shiloh Center. The old grain warehouse on the edge of Pine Hollow had been abandoned for over a decade. Rust clung to its beams like rot to bone. Windows shattered, roof sagging. But it had strong bones, Drew said. And just like the dog who had saved the town, it deserved a second chance. A year ago, no one in Pine Hollow had cared much for working dogs. They were tools, not heroes. After all, what could a dog do that a man couldn't? Then came the blizzard, then came the fire, and then came Shiloh. Now things had changed. Drew stood under the newly repainted sign, wiping dust from his jeans as the last support beam clicked into place. Behind him, Casey directed a group of volunteers unloading crates of chew-resistant beds and medical supplies. A dozen teenagers from the high school had shown up early, arguing over who got to repaint the indoor agility track. Even Pastor Wilkins had arrived with buckets of blue paint, saying, "If there's a dog in town more holy than this one, I haven't met it." Shiloh watched from the top of the steps, her bandages gone, her coat healthy again, the scar along her ribs now barely visible under new fur. She didn't bark, didn't beg for attention. She simply observed, queen of a new kind of kingdom. The biggest surprise wasn't the building, though. It was the puppies. 3 of them. The ones Casey had pulled from the snow that night. They were bigger now, awkward and energetic. One had Shiloh's eyes, another had her stance. The third, named Jasper by the local elementary school kids, had a habit of sitting exactly where Shiloh did, like a shadow studying the original. But none of them had her presence. Not yet. Inside, Drew had hung the torn harness she wore during the final takedown. Above it, a plaque. K9 Shiloh. She followed the scent of truth. The town had funded the center through bake sales, charity runs, and donations from strangers who'd read the news story that went national. War dog turned savior in winter siege. By March, a waiting list had formed. Veterans with PTSD, families with autistic children, search and rescue units. They all wanted a dog trained at Shiloh's center. Not just for skill, but for heart. Still, not everything came easily. Some townsfolk whispered that Drew had gone too far, that elevating a dog to local legend was dangerous sentimentality, that it blurred the lines between man and beast. But none of them said it to his face, and none of them volunteered to look Shiloh in the eye when she stood at the fence line, quiet, unmoving, as if reading something they hadn't yet admitted to themselves. Then came the boy, 8 years old, foster child, mute since birth. They brought him in as part of a therapy day. Teachers hovered, A social worker clutched paperwork like a shield. He didn't speak, didn't engage, until Shiloh approached. Slow, careful. She didn't nudge or sniff. She simply sat, in front of him, watching with those amber eyes that had once pierced through smoke and fear. The boy reached out, not with words, with fingers. He touched her ear, then her paw. Then, in the silence, he whispered something only Drew and Casey could hear. Safe. One word. Quiet. But it cracked something open. His social worker cried. The teacher covered her mouth. The boy just leaned into Shiloh's side, resting his head against her, eyes closed like he'd finally made it home. That night, Drew sat on the back steps, knees pulled to his chest. Shiloh lay beside him, her breathing steady, the town quiet. She's changing them, he said aloud. Casey, leaning against the rail, nodded. Maybe they were always good, just needed someone to remind them. He looked at her, smiled faintly. No, they needed her. Outside the center, the wind shifted. From the woods, coyotes howled distantly, but no one inside stirred. Because they had built something solid from something nearly broken, a community, a cause, and a home where paw prints led people back to themselves. The air was sharp, the kind that stung the lungs in the first breath of morning. Pine Hollow was quiet, cloaked in the hush of early winter, snowflakes drifting lazily through beams of golden light. Outside the renovated Shiloh Canine Center, Drew sat on the front steps, a battered mug of coffee steaming in his hands. He wore the same flannel jacket he'd worn the night of the fire. Same worn boots, different man. Beside him lay Shiloh. Her coat had thinned, greyed at the muzzle and down the spine, but her posture was alert. Eyes amber bright, trained not on anything in particular, but listening. Always listening. The kind of stillness that only comes from a dog who'd seen the worst and never once looked away. Inside the center, kids were laughing. One of the therapy groups had arrived early, elementary students learning how to care for dogs like heroes. One boy trailed behind the others, a red scarf too big for his face, dragging slightly in the snow. He carried a tennis ball but didn't throw it. Just stood there, watching Shiloh like she might vanish if he blinked. A young woman stepped up the porch steps, notepad in hand, press badge clipped to her coat. Freshman, journalism major from the community college. Eager eyes. "Mr. Taylor?" she asked. Drew looked up, his voice scratchy from the cold. "Just Drew." She nodded quickly, then hesitated before sitting beside him, pulling out a tiny recorder. Her hands shook slightly. Not from nerves, but from cold. "I've been reading about what happened last year," she said. "The standoff, the way Shiloh tracked that man across 2 counties, through snow, ice, fences, even when you told her to stop." She glanced down at the dog. "Why do you think she never stopped tracking him?" Drew didn't answer right away. He reached down, fingers brushing the top of Shiloh's head. She closed her eyes briefly at the way, contact. She remembered what the world was trying to forget. He finally said, "That pain doesn't vanish. It buries itself, and someone has to dig it out before it poisons everything." The girl scribbled something, but her hands slowed. "Is that what you think this place is? A way to dig it out?" He looked out across the snowy yard. "No, this place is what comes after the tracking, after the chaos. This is what you build when the storm passes and you're still standing." From inside, the door creaked open. A small puppy bolted out, ears too big for his head, tongue lolling sideways. The boy with the red scarf dropped the tennis ball, and the pup lunged for it, then missed entirely, tumbling into a heap. Laughter echoed. Shiloh lifted her head, tail tapping once on the porch. Not barking, not chasing, just watching. Drew smiled. "That one's named Rocket. He's got a spirit, no aim but all heart. The young journalist lowered her recorder. Do you think she knows she saved the town? Drew didn't answer that either. He just sat with her, both of them facing the sun, watching as the puppy pounced again. This time catching the ball. The boy clapped, red scarf flapping like a flag of surrender, not to war, but to something better, something gentle, a child, a dog, a snow-covered yard. This was what remained, not the fire, not the frostbite, not the fear, but the quiet, the healing, the next generation, and one old dog still guarding the porch. Not because she had to, because she chose to. If you ever wonder what loyalty looks like, don't ask for medals, don't look for the headlines, watch the ones who stay after the war ends, because some tracks are never meant to fade. What's your story with a loyal pet? Share it in the comments. And if Shiloh's journey moved you, even just a little, hit that subscribe button. Let's keep honoring dogs like her, not just for what they do, but for who they are. This is German Shepherd Stories, and this is what remains.